Hello and welcome to the Sunday Politics. Who should pay for childcare for the under-twos? Do we rely too heavily on the goodwill of Granny?
I've retired, semi-retired, and taken on the job.
And how are you finding it?
Yeah, it's super so far. It's really working very well, yeah.
The hoteliers who say the Prime Minister's new immigration rules would destroy their businesses.
I'm Nigel Way, owner of the Royal Castle Hotel. What worries me about this whole Brexit thing is where are my staff going to come from?
And the rousing conference speech which left some tipping Geoffrey Cox for the Tory leadership.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us seize that prize. Thank you. Thank you.
And joining me to discuss all that and more in the next half hour are Cheryl Murray, Conservative MP for South East Cornwall, Plymouth Labour Councillor Sue Dan and South West MEP William Dartmouth, now sitting as an independent after quitting UKIP last week. Well, we couldn't begin without acknowledging the remarkable speech Attorney General and Torridge and West Devon MP Geoffrey Cox made at the end of the Conservative conference. Reckoned by many to be the best speech of the whole conference season, it was intended as a warm-up for the Prime Minister, but some think Mr Cox upstaged his boss.
Like millions of others, I voted to leave the European Union. Not because I didn't wish to continue our special and close friendship and collaboration with our friends there, but because the political and democratic price of ever closer union was just too high.
Now, Cheryl, you will agree with the broad sort of Brexiteer sentiments there from Geoffrey Cox, but of course the reason he was chosen to be there was to essentially shore up the Prime Minister's position and to say that the party should be backing her and her Chequers deal. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, and I'm afraid that hasn't changed my mind. I don't believe that the deal agreed at Chequers...
So even Geoffrey Cox couldn't persuade you?
Not at all. I really do believe that that isn't going to deliver what my constituents, what the people of Cornwall, the people of this country voted for, and that's why anything that is presented to Parliament based on what was agreed at Chequers, I will be voting to reject.
Okay. Well, that's absolutely categorical. Sue, Jeremy Corbyn, of course, at the end of the Labour Party conference in his speech, was kind of suggesting that he could compromise. I mean, Geoffrey Cox was talking about the need to compromise with the Prime Minister. Where do you stand on that?
I think it's very difficult when you're in opposition, but we've always said in the Labour Party that when we have a deal, it's got to be one that is right for the country. So there does need to be a certain amount of pragmatism, but you've still got to have something which is going to protect our economy, protect our jobs, and make sure that we have a good economy moving forwards, because that's what Brexit is all about. It's making sure that the country is fit for purpose when we have come out of Europe.
And William, of course, you've recently left UKIP. I mean, I'd like just to hear a little bit about why that parting of the ways has taken place.
And I don't want to personalise these matters, but since Mr Batten has become leader of UKIP, which only happened in February, the entire direction of the party has been changed to become Islamophobic, homophobic, and I'm proud to say that I said many times that UKIP was the only party that banned, totally prescribed former members of the British National Party from becoming members of UKIP, and Mr Batten is an active supporter of that being waived, and at least one example. So there's a kind of creeping takeover. So it's become Islamophobic with Mr Batten's toxic views, which I'm not going to repeat on this programme, and I don't want to have anything to do with it.
Okay, Sue, just...
I just think you talk about free trade, but nothing comes for free. And, you know, this is about how we're going to run our economy. At the moment, we have apparently very, very little unemployment. So when all our migrant labour
we will talk. We're going to talk about.
But it is more about trade.
But
it is.
You mentioned trade.
It's
I mean,
not just politics.
There's some bullish talk this week from the Farming Minister George Eustice on this very topic.
When it comes to issues such as lamb, we may need to put tariffs, for instance, on Irish beef so that our mixed beef and sheep producers can diversify more into beef and away from lamb. You know, that may be the type of thing we have to consider. So we're giving thought to all of these things, but our priority, obviously, is to try to get that agreement. My own view is that once we've gone through this process, I think in, say, 5 years' time, when people look back, nobody will be arguing we should rejoin the EU. I think it's one of those, a bit like leaving the ERM or deciding not to join the euro. It seems like a really big controversial issue at the time, but actually it all turns out well in the end. And when we crashed out of the ERM, all sorts of people said that was going to cause chaos. In fact, we went on to enjoy an economic boom afterwards. And I think it'll be similar with leaving the European Union. A lot of these problems that people are flagging at the moment, we will find ways through, even if we have to do so by setting policy unilaterally.
So, Sue, we should be bright and upbeat, and if need be, George Eustice seems to be suggesting engage in a trade war if we end up with no deal.
A trade war over a border which we want to keep open. I mean, we have said that we want to have a total Irish solution which recognises the Good Friday Agreement. Slapping tariffs on half of the beef that comes off that island is not what you would call open trade. And also, we have to respect the fact that in terms of trade, we do want to come out of this well. But there was an article this week about about Cornish business about how the coming out of Europe is going to affect Cornwall so badly. So how can he say that in 5 years' time it won't matter? Because in 5 years we're going to have to put a lot of money back into Cornwall.
Okay, so I expect to have similar answers from William and Cheryl, but I want to put this to both of you. At the end of the day, you can't look, for instance, a West Country lamb farmer in the eye, or a major manufacturer in Plymouth who's reliant on, you know, the just-in-time system, and say we can be relaxed about the prospect of no deal.
I think, don't forget, it's not no deal, it's World Trade Organization.
Yes, but under World Trade, but a lamb farm would be looking at, say, 50% tariffs.
And
that would ruin
what
him.
George was basically saying there was we would have to put tariffs on Irish beef. About 70% of Ireland's beef comes into this country, and we may need to put tariffs on.
There's no guarantee a trade war is going to work.
No deal with the European Union.
High risk
and at the end of the day, I believe that is backing our farmers, which is basically what George was saying.
William, just very briefly, you were trade spokesman for UKIP.
Well, look, the basic fact is the three biggest exporters to the European Union, namely Russia, China and the United States, export under World Trade Organization rules.
But the uprooting of the present system...
No, hang on, just let me finish. As do 6 of the top 10, yes. As do 11 of the top 20. Now, if I may give you a much easier and coherent example, which some of your, which I'm certainly familiar with, is that wine produced in Australia, more wine produced in Australia is sold in this country than wine produced in France, wine produced in Italy, wine produced in Spain, and wine produced in Australia competes on price, basically. I don't insult Australian wine producers. It competes on price. This is notwithstanding the tariffs. Now, what happens on these programmes, with respect to you and your colleagues, is you pick out the one example where tariffs are very high, and that is agriculture. And something does need to be done about agriculture. But notwithstanding, we have a massive deficit with continental agricultural producers. Yes. And so in any tariff war, which we don't want, and with respect, your dialogue is seeking to impose on us, which we don't want. We're basically going to come out ahead.
But it's, in all fairness, it's also about the movement of goods, because at the moment we have a free customs movement of goods between us and the European continent and back again. So when you have a customs there that has to go through, that is going to slow everything down. And that just-in-time thing will have an awful, awful effect on some of our businesses and our fresh produce.
If you talk to Southampton docks, where a lot of trade comes in from outside of the European Union, from the rest of the world, they will tell you that it takes a few seconds longer.
And may I point out that we have a £96 billion deficit with the European Union.
We are running out of seconds with this programme. I want to move on, sticking with Brexit. But first, you can hear more from George Eustice on Inside Out tomorrow evening as they find out what Brexit could mean for the South West. That's Inside Out South West with Gemma Woodman at 7:30 tomorrow here on BBC One. Hoteliers in the region say proposals announced this week to prioritise high-skilled foreign workers earning over £30,000 a year could have a devastating effect on the hospitality industry. They say vacancies are hard enough to fill as it is. John Ayres has been to visit two prominent hotel owners in Devon.
My name is Keith Richardson and I own the Grand Hotel, which is right behind me here in Torquay in Devon. And my main concern today is Brexit.
Hi, I'm Nigel Way, owner of the Royal Castle Hotel. What worries me about this whole Brexit thing is where are my staff going to come from?
The reason hoteliers are worried is because after we leave the EU, the government says free movement will end and it will prioritise highly skilled immigrants.
Hello, housekeeping.
For years, EU workers have been welcomed by the hospitality industry here with open arms. The money they're offered is often better than back home.
I come here because the life here in England is very good. The people is amazing.
I working in Poland, like in job center. My wages was £200 per month. I have to pay rent like 100 per month. 100 left for life is not enough.
But the government's new proposals would mean highly skilled EU workers with a job offer of at least £30,000 would be prioritised. And many people in hospitality around here do not earn that.
We cannot afford £30,000 for the majority of our workers in this business. This is a very poorly paid business as hotels, because 40% plus, could be 45% of our income goes in wages.
Large hotels find it difficult to employ British people with the right skills, and they're often competing over staff.
When you move to another country to work, I'm sure you try to get a better life and settle down. So in this point, we're all worried because we don't know what's going to happen.
Spanish barman Carlos Rodriguez Perez and French chef Nicolas Legendre have both been in the UK for over a decade. They have British partners and children. They're worried their families might be forced to choose a nationality.
My partners, we got 3 children together. My partner is British, from Dartmouth. My children's born in Turbis Hospital. She now are a little bit confused if Theresa May want to check me out of the country. What to do with my children? I cannot let my children behind.
My wife is thinking about it, to actually go to being French, so that it's easier for her to travel across Europe, actually, to start with. If England was that close, I would have carried on traveling and chosen to settle in another country where I've got free movement. For me to become English, it would cost me best part of £1,500. For my children to become French, it was £12.50.
All of this uncertainty is now putting pressure on the industry.
We're now planning for Christmas and they're talking about going home. And I'm thinking, gosh, are they going to come back? Yeah, I know one of the French lads that works for us has been talking to the French government or the French whoever. And he doesn't want to end up being like one of these Windrush generation. They are obviously stopping and thinking, do I want to be here?
It would appear the solution to attract more British workers is for the industry to pay more. And many people will say that's a good thing. But hoteliers fear they won't be able to afford it.
William, I assume that you would back the Prime Minister in her very long-standing goal to bring immigration down.
Well, look, there's a national consensus in this country, outside the BBC, by the way, that immigration needs to be controlled like in our country, like any other country. Now, I rather think
does that mean that immigration is too high at the moment?
I rather think that segment, well, that's the consensus. I rather think that segment was made before the Prime Minister said that she was going to allow all the European people to actually stay here. And before you go into somebody else,
no, I'm not going to somebody else. I will stay with you. But
okay, thank you.
I can see the argument. The argument that we should, as a sovereign nation, control the numbers of immigrants.
Be able to control.
But that is not necessarily the same proposition as saying we have too many immigrants already. I'm interested in this...
That's the next proposition.
Okay,
that's the next proposition. The report
that the Prime Minister based her new policy on, went through all of these claims that immigrants put pressure on jobs, schools, the NHS, lead to peaks in crime, and there was no evidence to support any of that.
Well, I don't agree with that.
But what's your evidence that's not true?
What, sorry?
But what's your evidence that's contrary?
You raised the Prime Minister, who I've got no reason to speak for, said in her speech after Salzburg that the 4 million or so
can stay.
Can stay. And in so doing, by the way, she arguably let down the 800,000 or so British citizens working in the EU. So she's made an absolute freeze. So I don't see that this can be criticised. What would be more interesting to talk about, Martin, is many years ago I worked in the Middle East as an accountant. I'm a chartered accountant.
OK, but I'm interested in the impact of immigration on this country.
Well, just let me make this point. And I did it on the basis of having a work permit.
Yes,
and I would suggest that if there are staff shortages, they can be solved by work permits and not by giving people the permanent right.
This is not about the principle of control. It's about whether or not the numbers of immigrants we've had to date and the potential number of immigrants, projected number of immigrants in future, are having a negative or a positive impact on British society. And what I'm saying is the report the Prime Minister...
This is a different... Well, most people outside the BBC know that housing, infrastructure, education is pressured by a very large number of people. Well, I haven't read this report.
I'm going to beg to differ.
Martin, but you didn't tell me about it.
It's a very significant report.
Martin, one of the things that we have to remember is to look at the two different sorts of migrant workers. There are those, and it was 3 million, it's around 3 million European Union citizens who live in the UK, and the Prime Minister has quite rightly said they can stay. We're also looking at perhaps a seasonal agricultural workers scheme, which is something that I think William alluded to. But what we have to remember is we have, as a nation, reduced the number of people from outside of the European Union that have been able to come here to work. And what the Prime Minister is saying is everybody has to be treated in a fair way.
Cheryl, you bring me on to another point. I mean, we've had this target from under the Conservatives now for nearly a decade.
Fairness.
But Theresa May was Home Secretary for 6 years, from 2010 to 2016. She's been Prime Minister since, and she's had this target to bring immigration down to the tens of thousands.
And it was very unfair on those skilled workers that work from outside of the European Union.
Yeah, but Cheryl, the point is, for all of that time, consistently, immigration from outside the EU has been higher. The government has had every power it needs to bring that immigration down. Why should the public now believe the Prime Minister has not brought that down when she had the power to do it?
One of the things that I would say, particularly to the hoteliers and the tourist industry in my constituency, and I'm sure my colleagues agree, if they feel there is going to be a crisis for them with regard to not being able to get the workers, please write to me, because I will then
make at the moment it looks as if they're only been exempted for agriculture.
I will then make the case to have another scheme in the same way as the agricultural
to come back to the end of that
scheme.
film, I mean, it strikes me that driving to improve wages for workers in the UK would be something Labour would be quite keen on. So if this drives up wages, then...
Well, there's always been a suspicion that having migrant labour actually drives labour down, the price of labour down, but that isn't true. We have a minimum wage, which you know from the fact that the Labour Party is going to raise when we get into control, but this isn't about what the wages are. This is about the work that needs to be done in the UK. Theresa May was unable to reach her own targets. This is almost a negative way of being able to do that. We need skilled labour in this country. We know that in social care, in hospitals, in construction, in hospitality, we've already got a lot of European migrant labour here who do a really good job, and overall migration are an asset to the country. They pay their taxes. They are not the reason why, but they are not the reason why we have pressure on the NHS or housing or education. And I hate to say, years and years of Tory austerity have brought that on us. So what we need to do is, what do we need moving forwards? Because once these labour markets have stopped, and we can't have people coming over under the Tory proposed policy, we will have hundreds and thousands of jobs in the UK that will not be filled. We will have care homes who can't get staff. We will have hotels and restaurants who won't be able to find staff.
And we'll have
food
over £1
rotting.
trillion worth of debt again if we had a Labour government.
Yeah, but
This
we have
is
open door immigration, is that your policy?
No, this is about having immigration that fits the demands of what we need.
So that's work permits?
So
Australian rules. People, that's actually UK
But it's
policy. Not in UKIP anymore, but it is.
But it's
an
having,
Australian
it's having,
point
It's very similar to what the Conservatives
Australian
are.
style
no,
point
but no, it's
system.
not, because I'm afraid I don't know a social care worker who earns £30,000 a year. But a lot of them are necessary to work within our care homes.
I will accept that. I think we need to explain this in a much more clear way.
We're all in favour of explaining things as clearly as possible. A report by the TUC this month revealed that working parents with children under 5 have seen nursery fees rise 3 times faster than their wages over the past decade. And the South West sees some of the highest relative costs in the country. Last week, Jeremy Corbyn pledged to offer universal help with costs, but there was no mention of anything similar at this week's Conservative conference. We sent Anna Vile out on the school run to talk to some local mums.
It's enough to stress out even the most organised of parents. Gemma is getting 4 children aged 7 and under ready to take to nursery and school. But it's the cost, not the chaos, which causes the biggest headache.
The bill just for Lily is about £860 a month, and that's not full-time, that's 3 full days, what they call full days, and 1 short day. I just don't think anyone can be expected to hold down a job for any amount of children between 9 and 3 and earn enough to feed them and house them and clothe them. And yeah, it's difficult even with one. She's our most expensive, and at £850 you've got to earn a decent wage just to, you know, just to justify that.
Research by the TUC says that nursery costs have increased by 50% compared to wages, which have only risen by 17% in the last 10 years.
At the moment, funding for the 2 and unders is limited. For 3 to 4-year-olds, you can apply for 30 hours of free childcare from the government if you work 16 hours or more a week. But Jeremy Corbyn says this isn't enough. He wants this to open up to 2-year-olds as well and give those on the lowest incomes additional help. So just how much of these costs should the state be responsible for?
I pay for it because I work from home, and she doesn't get her funding until she's 3, so at the moment I'm paying for it. And I do think it's up to the parent what they do, because you can't expect the government to fund your child, because I've chosen to have Sophie, so it's up to me to pay for her to go to nursery. You know, if I couldn't afford it, then I wouldn't have had her.
It's a privilege to look after your grandchildren, but yes, I think the state should be responsible for certain elements. As children get older, I think in their preschool year, definitely there should be some provision, more than there is now. Nana, read it in a minute.
I'm a full-time mum, so I'm self-employed, so I do my own evening work, because my husband goes to work at 6 in the morning, doesn't get home until 6 in the evening. So I've got nobody to help me out during the day. So until I get the funding, when Sebastian turns 3, you know, it's just Sebastian and I, really.
We've heard from grandparents and parents, but what about the professionals who provide childcare?
It's really difficult from our point of view to actually claim the money. It is a really complicated process. It goes wrong a lot of the time. We have to wait for our money, our payments. It's not like, okay, at the end of the week there's your money or whatever. It's really, really complicated. And so lots of us don't take it. And then so people will choose to go elsewhere for childcare.
No one said returning to work was easy, but even the mums here can't agree on what should be on offer.
Sharon, I think when we discussed this on a previous programme, you said basically that mums should get together and agree practical voluntary solutions among themselves, and I think you said that's what you did with other mums when you had small children.
I certainly did, and of course my children had different childcare provisions. My daughter went to a nursery. I paid for the full nursery fees. My son, grandparents looked after them when they weren't able to. Yes, we did club together. What we need to look at, particularly with what Jeremy Corbyn is offering, it's reported that it's going to cost over £5 billion. Now, who's going to be paying for that? Because we know that it's saddling future generations with debt again. So those people who are receiving the childcare could very well be saddled with the debt and having to repay that when they start earning. We all want to be able to help mums get back to work, particularly if they've got a career. But we have to do it in an affordable way, and we've got to cut our garment to fit our cloth, really.
If you're on the minimum wage and you have to pay for childcare costs, it is nigh on impossible to be able to do that. You may be able to get a job in school time if you're lucky, but who looks after the children in the holidays? So we have to invest in young people so that they have the education that they deserve. But also, we need a labour force as well. We need people to go back to work. So if we're not going to have so many people coming over from Europe, and I am joining the dots here, Cheryl, we then have to invest to make sure that we have people who can go out into the workforce and do their jobs.
Spend
and
the Brexit bonus on £5 billion on Jeremy Corbyn's proposal.
Having working parents is really good for the economy, and it's good for kids to have that beautiful start and have access to education at a young age.
William,
and actually, Jeremy Corbyn did say that it would be phased in over a parliament, and
reported as £5
there would be
billion
better payments and better training, so you'd have a better educational start for our children.
William, I'm sure this is an issue I've never discussed with you.
No, you never have. But I just like to float the thought that we take $5 billion out of the $12 billion foreign aid budget and spend it on this and join up the dots, as you very eloquently and very correctly said.
Well, I'm an international socialist, and I actually think that we should look after people here and abroad
just quickly,
as well.
Cheryl, do you think the foreign aid budget is too big?
I think the foreign aid budget is actually spent on a lot of good things. Look at Indonesia this week. Now, I'm sorry, they need that help. We're sending our armed forces out there to help them. And William, I really do believe that when countries are in crisis, we should step in and help.
OK, well, thank you to the three of you. We leave you with a little bit more of Geoffrey Cox, likened variously to Gandalf, Tom Baker and Brian Blessed, warming to his theme.
And so, let us say with Milton, methinks I see in my mind a noble and puissant nation, rousing herself like a strong man after sleep, and shaking her invincible locks. Methinks I see her as an eagle, mewing her mighty youth, and kindling her undazzled eyes at the full midday beam. Ladies and gentlemen, let us seize that prize. Thank you.